Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me, ba? Can you hear me?
Can you hear
Can
me?
you hear me? Yes. You can. I can. Hello.
Can you
Ang
hear me,
dami
my
na
friend?
nila. May 200 na tayong nakatutok sa atin yan. And hindi pa nag-good night at nag-good evening silang lahat. Maliban kay Eliseo, Rain, sino pa? Delzy, Fernie, okay. Ray Francisco, oy, bago to. Bagong taga-greet. Okay, Dai. Uy, si Dai. Mayong gabi, Dai. Loud and clear daw, sabi niya. Okay.
Si Densyo ba? Nandyan ba si Densyo?
Then siya, Kuya Kot.
O,
Si
si
Kuya Kot.
Kuya Kasabihan.
Kuya Kot. I like
Nandiyan
Kuya
ka na
Kot.
ba?
Bakit? Magsasalita ba si Kuya Kot?
Nagpakita ka na, Kuya Kot.
Magsalita ka naman dyan, Kuya Kot. Mag-quote ka dyan para
Nandito sa
makilala
studio,
ka. Ha?
Nandito sa studio.
Ay, nandyan ba? Ayun o, Kuya Kot. Good evening, Kuya Kot. Promote mo naman yung iyong bagong page, Kuya Kot.
Promote.
Tama naman, siyempre, bakit hindi? Ako pa, ano?
O, i-promote mo nga yung ano.
Isang quote.
Isang quote.
Isang quote.
Oh.
Huwag maglakad pag nakapikit.
Ganyan.
Yun lang yun.
Yung ano, yung tindahan doon sa Tarlac, i-plug natin.
Yung Kowloon na Tarlac City branch.
Hmm.
Punta kayo doon. Mas maraming quote doon. Nakakatakot.
Nakakatakot.
Okay.
Yan na gabi. Yan muna kayo.
Kung nakikinig yan siya, sabi mo hinaan yung volume niya kasi nagpipigback.
Ako,
Galing sa side mo eh. Oo. Galing sa iyo eh. Or galing sa kanya, hindi ko alam. Yep. So, may bago yan siyang page si Kuya Kot. Pogi, di ba? Pogi si Kuya Kot. Magandang gabi kay Sir Ed, kay Atinitz, kay Edward, kay ano ba? Sino pa ba?
Si Edward.
Hindi, si Engineer Amoyo. Okay, good evening. Good morning na daw sa kanila. Saan ba to? Ay, from Canada. Alright. So, what's your topic for tonight?
Continuation ng discussion kagabi. Pero ano yung sinabi mo?
Nakahabol ba itong mga friends natin kagabi sa dulo? Sa ating conclusion?
Hindi.
Ha? Yung conclusion. Maganda yung conclusion natin kagabi na yung last part. Sino bang na-miss niyo ba yung last part? Yung last part lang yung, andun si Kuya Edo. Eduardo. Hello.
Sir, magandang gabi, sir.
Pogi din
kamukha ni ano, ito si Sir Ed, kamukha ni
Pogi.
Kamukha ni Ed Lingaw yan, ano?
Ed Lingaw yan.
Di ba?
Ed din naman eh.
Ed Lingaw. Kamukha niya. Kamusta nga pala kay Ed Lingaw? Yung ating
by the way,
kasama natin sa media.
Baka may mga nakakakilala sa inyo sa aming mga kaibigan sa kabila.
Si Chow.
Hindi yung Makabayan Black, no? I think it's really time to talk to them, no? In any forum, kung gusto nila ng bastusan dito, kung gusto nila ng formalan dun sa DWIC. Kasi sila ata yung pinakaunang nag-file ng franchise bill para sa ABS-CBN, no?
ABS-CBN.
Yung tatlong Makabayan Black. It is the challenge daw for this 19th Congress. Okay. So kung meron man sa inyo nakakakilala. Okay, hindi po kami nakikipag-away, kami ay gusto makipag-usap para malaman natin kung, di ba? Meron bang logic yung kanilang argument? Bigyan natin sila ng pagkakataong magsalita. Okay? Napanood daw nila yung last tawag nito yung
video clip.
Hindi, yung si creative destruction.
Yes.
Hindi, ganito na lang. Ilagay ko na lang dito, irarunning natin yung creative destruction, no? No, yung at least yung last two sentence, yung binasa natin na very
yung quote.
I-quote natin. Kasi nandyan si Kuya Quote, i-quote natin dito running. Ikaw mo na ihanda ko lang yung running quote.
Ano yung kuyakot? Meron akong bagong kasabihan, sir.
Ikukuyakot natin to.
Nabasa mo na ba yung post ko na bagong kasabihan na na-invento ko?
Hindi po ako nagbasa kasi galing ako sa ano kanina.
Sino po sa inyo dyan ang nakabasa ng aking bagong kasabihan? Ako po yung gumawa nun sa aking sa wall. Nasa aking wall. Hindi pwedeng ako magsabi nun dahil kailangan na si Dencio nga yung magsabi nun.
Where are you? How do I go there? Okay, pwede ka ba?
Kalito itong ang daming cellphone. Ewan ba? Hi, good evening, Maricel, si Froilan Soberano. Miss Olans, ang kulit mo na naman ha. Miss Olans ha. Si Maki, si Joy is life. Amsterdam, nasa ano siya, sa the Netherlands. Si Amor Tragura. Good evening po sa inyo. Si Nian Yu. Si Rocky, andyan na naman si Rocky, si Sir Ed. Ang pogi talaga rin ni Sir Ed, no? Parang, wala ka-level talaga tayo sa kanya, no? No?
Attorney, by the way, magkukwento lang ako, no? Kasi kagabi, pagkatapos nung live natin, biglang nawala yung video sa wall ko, di ba?
Di ba sabi ko sa'yo, wala sa akin? Hindi pa...
I did not appear in mine until I had to make so many, parang halos nag-repost ako eh. Kaya pag tiningnan mo, walang views yan, yung video sa wall ko.
Yeah.
And then, nag-exit na ako at nag-restart. Yung aking Facebook ngayon ay naka-Espanyol. Lahat. Pag magbukas ako ng bagong page, Espanyol na siya. Pero kung iba yung pubuksan ko, hindi siya Espanyol. So anyway, it's just funny. No? Funny.
Oo nga. Wala namang report na na-hack ka or something na pinapapalitan yung password mo.
Wala naman. But yun, so I'm looking for your page in Spanish.
Ang ganda niya,
Descarga la información.
Meron, isasabihin ko sa'yo paano maging English yan ulit. Okay, I will guide you to...
Facebook lang ang apektado, hindi yung buong browser.
Meron yan dyan sa settings sa baba. Hanapin ko so that you can go back to English.
Hindi, mamaya na. Let's worry about that. Hanapin ko muna yung post mo na may bago akong kasabihan.
Circumference. Pero ang sabi ni nabasa na daw niya si Luz Monton. May tatlong ulo na tumatawa.
Lagyan ko lang siya ng context. Lagyan ko ng context ang aking nakikita. Publicaciones, filtros, Ahmed circumference. Pero Tagalog ito May bago akong kasabihan. Improvement siya ng isang English na kasabihan. Pero itong nabuo ko ay praktikal at madaling maintindihan. Ito.
Like and share mo na.
Okay? Like and share mo na. I-share ko muna ito. No.
Like share. Ay, wag mo i-share yan.
Ang share ba ay compartir? Okay.
Compartir. Yes. Senyor.
Okay. May dalawang direksyon ang pagka-jot. Uy, ano to? Parot-parito. Ano ba yan?
Binasa nga siya. Binasa nga ni Uncle JP. Ulit lang. Hi, Faye.
Comentarios. Una vez compartido. Ay, may nag-compartir.
Si Pinay.
Niluloko tayo mga kaibigan.
LZ.
I don't like that.
Sabi ko sa'yo, pumunta ka dito. May single malt dito kanina eh.
Saan? Sinabihan mo?
Dito sa Dalan Ronnie. Larga.
Hindi. Sige, ikaw muna. Ka muna. Simula ka muna ng yung first presentation para hindi mabitin yung ating mga kaibigan.
Ganito na lang. I-play ko yung introduction na play natin kagabi na merong konting
extra.
Hindi pala. Hindi, wag yung kagabi.
You do the yung bago na.
Yung bago na. Okay. Intro muna. Itong ating demokrasya sa Pilipinas, ang sistema ng demokrasya natin sa Pilipinas ay minana natin sa mga kano. Nung tayo ay binili ng mga kano sa mga Espanyol ay sila ang nagtuloy ng ating gobyerno, pamamahala sa ating bansa. At ang kanilang pamamahala na ginawa din sa ating bansa ay yung demokrasya na siyang gobyerno rin, ang gobyerno din nila doon sa Amerika noong 1898. Di ba? 1898 sila. Di ba, Uncle JP? 1898 sila. Tayo kinuha ng
Amerikano.
mga ano. So, 1898.
Kinupkop.
Kinupkop tayo. Binili, kinupkop.
Kinupkop.
Niyakap.
Kinupkop.
Pero,
Inakay.
pero, tandaan nyo na nung panahon ng Kastila, tayo ay kolonya. Okay? We are a colony of Spain. Well, by definition, we are colony of Spain. Hindi tayo demokratiko na bansa. Okay? Tayo ay kolonya ng Espanya. Nung tayo ay kinupkop, sabi ni Uncle JP, ng mga kano.
Questionable yan, ha? Whether we were not democratic.
Kolonya pa rin tayo. Kolonya pa rin tayo, hindi tayo demokratiko. Fast forward to after World War II. Kung kailan tayo ay binigyan ng sarilan. Okay? Independence Day ng Pilipinas. That is in 1946. Tama ba?
July 4,
1946. Yun yung ating kasarinlan. Doon tayo nagsimulang maging sariling sovereign country. Okay? Yan ang evolution ng bansang Pilipinas. Mula sa kolonya ng Espanya, naging kolonya ng Amerika, for a while naging kolonya ng Japan sa World War II, and then naging kolonya uli ng Amerika o Commonwealth, yung kanyang parang tuta. Yung sige, meron kayong maliit na democratic government dyan, pero sa amin pa rin kayo mananagot. Okay? At ang budget ninyo ay galing pa rin sa Amerika. American Congress pa rin na mag-a-approve niyan. And then, in 1946, we were given our independence, I think.
After the war. After the war. Wasak na wasak ang Manila kasi.
Wasak na wasak. Ayaw na nilang magkaroon ng obligasyon na i-rebuild ang Manila. Abala na kayo dyan, mga Pilipino naman pala kayo. Meron kayo sariling bansa. O di sige, bigyan namin independence. Magaling kumupkop ang mga kano, ano? Medyo tago sa puso yung kanilang pagmamalasakit sa atin. Ang galing talaga mga kano. Sila yung the best na mga tao sa mundo talaga. Okay, anyway. Itong demokrasya na iniwan sa atin ng mga kano ay hindi sa atin. Hindi tayo ang nag-develop niyan. Hindi tayo ang nag-establish niyan. Hindi tayo ang nag-develop niyan. Transplant lang yan dito sa Pilipinas. At transplant yan dito sa Pilipinas sa state. Okay, the democracy that we received from America when we became independent was the same democracy at that level, at that point where they gave it to us. Okay,
it was not the same as ours now.
It is not the same as ours now. Yung kanilang demokrasya noong binigay nila sa atin at the level of 1898, at the time of 1898, was how democracy was happening in America during the time. Kaya hindi nila tayo pinayagang magsimula sa pinakaunang step na ginawa nila when they were starting out as a democratic country, which happened in early 1700s or very early 1800s, late 1700s, nung nagtayo sila ng founding fathers nila, di ba? Gumawa sila ng kanilang declaration, ganyan-ganyan. Sina George Washington, ganyan-ganyan. Nagsimula sila doon in a certain form of democracy that is completely different from what we have when it was given to us. Okay? Kumbaga, naging ang demokrasya na binigay sa atin ay mga about 50 years old or 90 years old na democracy sa Amerika. Okay, so hindi natin nakita nung nagkaroon tayo ng demokrasya kung paano pinanganak ang demokrasya, paano nagsimula yan, paano yung birth pangs niyan, yung bagong-bago pa lang siya. Hindi natin nakita lahat yan kasi hindi tayo pinayagan na magsimula sa ating sariling demokrasya. Yan yung status natin when we got democracy. So now, we have to explain kung bakit nandito tayo ngayon. Ang nandito tayo ngayon dahil dyan, transplant yung democracy sa atin when it was already a teenager. It was not given to us as an infant child. It was given to us as a teenager. So, pang sumort ka tayo, teenager democracy na tayo ngayon when we are not ready for what democracy would have been if we were left to develop it ourselves. Okay? Ngayon, ipakita natin sa inyo, it's a short 5 minutes, 6 minutes clip na nakikwento nito kung paano nagkaroon ng ating brand of democracy sa Pilipinas, which really is a brand of democracy that the US had at the time when we were given this kind of democracy, right? Okay,
lagyan natin ng ano yan, ha?
Meron naman tayong attribution dyan eh.
Si Democracy ba ito? Democracy Jackson, Democracy Part 1?
Jackson na Part 1. Sige.
Lagay natin sa ilalim para hindi tayo ma-copyright.
Yan.
Audio?
Ay, ipi-play ko, sabihin nyo kung may audio.
When we talk about the big social movements of the early 19th century in the United States, you can't deny that the emergence of Jacksonian democracy is one of the most influential aspects of early 19th century culture. So what was Jacksonian democracy and why do we care so much about it? Well, I want to make the argument to you that Jacksonian democracy was really the birth of modern American political culture. And by that, I mean that during this time, lots of practices emerged that are still with us today. For example, the two-party system, the spoils system, even some aspects of American political character that are still with us today emerged in this time period. And by that, I mean the kinds of traits that we like to see in our politicians to consider them electable. So in this series on Jacksonian democracy, I'm going to take you on a journey from the earlier American political culture, some of the major changes that came about in the Jacksonian period, and then just discuss some of the ways that this still influences us today. All right, so if Jacksonian democracy was a new thing, what came before it? Well, in the very early era of American political life, and I'm talking here from approximately 1790 to about 1820, American politics was very aristocratic. There were a couple of families that tended to dominate politics. The Adams family, for example, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. And these men were kind of considered to be maybe a higher character of man. They were the quintessential citizens of a republic. And along with that came, a certain amount of wealth and status and education. In between George Washington and Andrew Jackson, every single person who served as president had a college degree. Many of them were Virginians, particularly Virginian planters.
Mga ginong may lupa.
And a lot of people from Massachusetts in the first couple of years of the Republic. And many of them kind of shared a concern that there could be too much democracy, shall we say.
Take note of that, too much democracy. Too much democracy will destroy the country. Sounds familiar, di ba? Tuloy tayo.
Even though the United States was a democracy, many of the founders of the United States worried about the tyranny of the majority, the tyranny of the mob that they had set up this democratic experiment where many people could vote, but they were afraid of having just too many people voting because they looked down on lower classes of society in that time period. They worried that if you didn't have a stake in the country, usually shown by property ownership, either in terms of land or in
Mhm.
terms of wealth, then you wouldn't have the proper investment in the fate of the nation in order to make a rational decision about what sort of policies should be enacted. So, in the early
Okay.
United States, many states had voting laws that restricted the franchise to just propertied men. So really a quite small proportion of the overall populace of the United States could vote.
Mhm.
Interestingly, this actually meant that in some northern states, both free people of color, free black men,
White men and black men.
and women
Not natives.
could
Not
vote
natives. Mm. No women,
because
no
they met
natives.
the requirements for property ownership. But in the early 1800s, 1810s, these ideals of democracy began to catch on more and more among the common people.
Mm.
And as new states joined the Union, like Ohio and Illinois, they came in with state constitutions saying that all white male citizens
Okay.
could vote,
Wait. Di ba,
regardless.
sa inyo na, okay, wait lang, pause na. Sa inyo na familiar
Pause.
sa US history, remember when they made that constitution, their boundary was Florida in the south, and then the Louisiana sa kabila. No, it
Mm.
was just a small piece of what we know now as the entire United States. So that is what
Mm.
they're talking about, ha. May mga yung mga nadagdag are from French colonies, and they themselves, itong mga lalaking to, they liberated themselves from the British. But the
Yes.
additions to the US that we know now came from the French, the
Spaniards.
Spanish, and the French colonies, and then there were
Ang
other.
Texas,
Texas
they
was
came
Spanish.
later.
Mm,
They came later when they stole it from the Mexicans. But
correct.
that's
A-
later on.
And the issues that they were facing when they were deciding whether or not they were going to buy these new lands or just get it, yan yung mga kasama sa mga issue na
Mga
hinarap din
policies.
nila sa atin. Okay, yeah, go.
Tuloy.
Tulay.
Of whether or not they owned property or they paid taxes. So, in this time period, white male citizenship became associated with voting, and some of the other states began to rewrite their state constitutions to grant the vote to all white males. And it probably won't surprise you that when they rewrote those laws, they managed to take out a little loophole for free people of color and women with certain amounts of property.
Okay? At this
Yeah.
point, in-amend ng karamihan ng mga already members of the Federal America, dati may right yung mga free black men at mga women na white and black, so long as they had property, they can vote. Pero nung sumali na yung Ohio and Illinois, na meron na silang sariling constitution before they joined, ay ginaya sila itong mga constitution nila ng mga dati ng miyembro. And what they did is they changed their constitutions to say that lahat ng mga white male citizens kahit na walang property at hindi nagbabayad ng tax ay pwede nang bumoto. At the same time, tinanggal na nila yung freedom ng black men and women to vote. So at that time, hindi na pwedeng bumoto ang mga black at saka mga babae. Ang original na sitwasyon ay lahat nakakaboto. Alright, tuloy tayo.
So by the end of this period, in the 1850s, all property requirements for voting had been eliminated, and any white male above the age of 21 in the United States had the right to vote. And we'll get to what that meant for American politics in the next video.
Okay. That's it. Tapos na.
Okay.
Meron pang susunod dyan, pero recap mo na. And
We need to process this for a while, no?
Context.
Tama, sige. Contextualize natin.
Okay, go ahead. Ikaw.
No, you you
Okay.
begin the discussion.
Ang nangyari dito ay ang original situation. Well, this is not the original situation because the story started in 1810. 1810, that's already about si Jackson is the 7th president. So there had already been 6 presidents before him. Yung tatlong lalaki dito na pinakita, yung isa ay si John Adams. Yung una naman ay si Henry something, nakalimutan ko ng pangalan. Hindi yan sila mga presidente. Although ito si John Adams was also a president before this under Jackson. But hindi yan silang tatlo presidente. Ibig lang sabihin yan na timeline sila yung
founding fathers. The founding fathers.
Okay, so there were 6 presidents before Andrew Jackson. Ito pinag-uusapan natin itong topic na nasa dulo, no. Siya ang pinag-uusapan natin dito dahil siya ang nagpalit ng uri ng demokrasya sa Amerika from pluralist elitist aristocratic democracy into something else, and we will know what that something else means in the next video. Pero nakita nyo kanina na namana natin ang mga characteristics ng early democracy ng Amerika, kagaya ng two-party system. Okay? Kagaya ng spoil system. Anong ibig sabihin ng spoil system? Kung sino ang nanalo sa eleksyon, ang lahat ng nakaupo sa kanyang gobyerno ay i-appoint niya. So siya pumili ng lahat ng mga secretaries ng bawat department. Which is what we are still doing until now. Kung sino ang nanalong presidente, siya ang mag-appoint ng lahat ng kanyang miyembro ng cabinet. And then, so yan ang minana natin. Okay, minana natin. And so it's safe to say that we inherited the democracy that Andrew Jackson already started. Okay? Because this is 1830, they came here at 1898, si Andrew Jackson, nagawa niya na yung change sa Amerika. Kaya hindi na itong original na democracy ng Amerika ang ibinigay sa atin, kundi yung kanyang version na ni Andrew Jackson. Alright? And let's continue with the next video. It's the same, palitan mo na lang yung attribution, yung part 2.
Okay, part 2.
And then, yes, and we will now watch it.
When we talk about the big social...
Oh, that's not it. Yung isa. Dish 1.
Dish 1. Okay, just stay there, and we will
stay there.
get to know them.
Watching this. Kasi ito yung ating history ng ating demokrasya. Hindi kasi sa atin yan. Sa kanila. Ba't ayaw mo nang mag-play dyan, ha? Anong problema mo? While starting your device, nakakaiyak ka naman, sir.
Ano daw?
Na-reload ko lang.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Do you need time to reload? Okay, do you need time to reload?
Well, it's already, hold on. It's already...
Okay.
Play.
Kasi, okay.
Okay, ito na yung second part.
So we've been talking about the emergence of Jacksonian democracy in the first half of the 19th century in the United States. And we've been talking about how in this time period, the vote was slowly extended to all white male citizens, so that by the end of this period, there were no more property requirements in the United States, and any white male citizen could vote. Now, those property requirements had allowed free people of color and women to vote in some states. And when voting became associated with white male citizens, those little loopholes ended up getting closed. But this expansion of voting rights to all white male citizens really represents a shift in how the average American thought about who deserved to have a voice in the political process of the United States. They stopped placing so much value on the sort of aristocratic Republican citizenship of the early days of the United States, where someone like George Washington would never run for office. He would stand for office. You wouldn't promote yourself. That would be vulgar. Instead, you would have men of well-known character promote you. But by the 1820s, very few Americans Americans believed in the idea that there could be such a thing as too much democracy, that you would have to avoid the mob rule. Instead, they wanted the mob rule. They wanted a great expansion of democracy, and that was to them the real character of the United States. Now, I should also mention that this expansion of democracy was part of a larger international expansion of democracy. Similar laws that eliminated property restrictions on voting were also being passed in England and France at this time period. So there's kind of an international wave to broaden the franchise. But the extension of voting in Europe is nothing like the extension of voting in the United States. There are nearly twice as many eligible voters in the United States in the 1830s as there are in Britain, with a population that's half the size. So while European nations are taking small steps toward expanding the franchise, the United States is taking huge steps in this time period. So the first election where we start to see the influence of this new wave of voters is in the election of 1824. And may give us a little bit more space to talk about this. So the election of 1824 was a contest between John
President
Quincy
Monroe.
Adams,
Okay.
son of American founder John Adams, Andrew Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
famous war hero from the War of 1812, the victor of the Battle of New Orleans, and Henry Clay,
Okay.
become known as the Great Compromiser for having pretty much spent his entire political career either running for president or putting together some kind of compromise. Now, John Quincy Adams, I think, kind of epitomized the older school of American democracy. He was reticent to campaign on his own behalf. He was very interested in academics and internal improvements. He didn't really see himself as being part of a particular political party. In fact, all three of these men were actually running as Republicans, because in the era of good feelings, there's only the Republican Party. So you can see how confusing this might have been as a voter to have three different candidates from the same party, and they're supposed to be different than each other. So in this election, Andrew Jackson wins the popular vote, and John Quincy Adams wins the electoral vote. And Henry Clay wins neither. Now, in a situation like this, who got to be president was decided by the House of Representatives. Well, guess who was Speaker of the House? Henry Clay. So he's out of the running himself, but he is in a position to make quite an impact on who wins the presidency. Well, John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay didn't have a whole lot in common, but they sure both hated Andrew Jackson. So Clay and Adams meet, and Henry Clay says, yeah, John Q, I'll see if I can get the House to vote for you. And that's what happens. So the House elects John Quincy Adams president. And then, just a couple days later, John Quincy Adams says that Henry Clay will get to be his Secretary of State, which was
okay, ano yan
of a
political exchanges, no?
Yan yung
Which
spoils
is part of the democratic
process. Yan yung sinabi natin kanina na kung sino ang manalo siya mag-appoint. Pero also, take note that ito rin yung nangyari kaya yung sinubukang gawin ni Leni Robredo na kinantsaba niya yung isang yung ibang mga kandidato para siya na lang at saka si BBM ang matira.
At naalala niyo yung kwento natin kay Stonehill. Kay Stonehill, yan din yun.
Yan.
Okay.
Ganon din ang ginawa ni John Quincy Adams at Henry Clay noong 1824 election. Nanalo si Andrew Jackson sa popular vote, okay? Pero meron kasing elitist system na yung tinatawag na electoral college na pwede rin silang bumoto on their own na kahit kabalintunaan at kabaliktaran nung ipinanalo ng popular vote. At ganito nga ang nangyari dito. Si Andrew Jackson ang nanalo popular vote, electoral vote si John Quincy Adams. At dahil si Henry Clay yung Speaker of the House, ang pinaboran niya ay si John Quincy Adams. Talo si Andrew Jackson, bad trip siya. Tuloy tayo.
Position. And Andrew Jackson and his supporters go ballistic. They say that this was a corrupt bargain behind closed doors in which John Quincy.
Nawala ka eh. Nawala ka. Nawala ka na audio. You're gone. Hey, your audio is gone. All of your audio. In the meantime, I will share something. Kasi ito, nakikinig lang ako sa ito material ni Attorney Ahmed. But if you're ready, just go ahead. No? Are you ready? May audio ka na? Yan, you have. I think you have. Salita ka lang.
Meron na ba? Meron na ba? Narinig?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Play. Go. Nawala. Wala.
Bakit nawawala? Hindi ba
It's not playing. It's playing. Ayun, wala siyang audio. Okay. Where does this go?
Malapit na. Maikli na lang yan.
No. Wala siyang audio eh.
Okay, ulitin natin.
Okay.
Meron.
You,
Narinig mo yung sa TV? Yung sa TV. Yung nag-i-English. Naririnig daw naman, sabi niya. Sabi ni Densyo, naririnig daw niya.
baka kayo dyan. Dito sa amin, wala.
Hold on.
I can hear you, but not that.
Yung sa TV, Densyo. Yung Amerikanong babae ang nagsasalita.
Tingnan mo sa comments. Oh, yan oh, wala. Okay. Anyari, wala.
Ulitin. I-play ko ulit ha. Sabihin niyo sa akin kung...
sige, mag-play ka. Play mo siya and then move mo lang siya doon, no? Maybe yung audio out mo yung pinutol. Okay. I have exactly the same material which talks about the liberty of the press, no? And a result of all of those things that we are seeing on video. But this one we have to read because I'm a reader guy. I'm not a player guy. Wala nga akong audio naririnig. Can you play it again, Ahmed?
Okay, ulitin ko kasi pleta.
Okay.
At the same stage, at the same time signature.
Sige, play mo na. That's it?
Quite a plum of a political position. And Andrew Jackson and his supporters go ballistic. They say that this was a corrupt bargain behind closed doors in which John Quincy Adams bribed Henry Clay to give him the presidency in exchange for this political position. Now, there's no evidence that this actual corrupt bargain really happened, but even if it did, it was totally in line with the earlier playbook of American democracy. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of situation, where the better sort of men, the higher men of character, made a deal between themselves of who would lead this nation. And the outrage over this possible collusion between Adams and Clay really signaled that the old days of a couple of people making decisions about American politics were over, that this kind of deal between statesmen was now seen as undemocratic or crooked or something that was done behind closed doors, and that was against the American character. And Andrew Jackson is really trying to ride his wave of popular discontent over someone winning the popular vote, but losing the electoral vote due to, in his mind, a corrupt bargain right into the presidency in the election of 1828. And we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yun. Good.
Ikaw.
Nice.
Komentary mo.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. This situation is the exact kumbaga description of the system of elitism, no? Elitism is what we found in our stories dun sa ating history about the Stonehill incident where JFK was so incensed about the arrangement that he had to intervene, and naalala niyo yun, no? Hindi alam ni Macapagal just before he was inaugurated that his incoming Secretary of Justice was already in cahoots with the FBI that they will be operating here, and they had to get this Stonehill out of the Philippines because of his intervention of the elections that happened here. They bought off one candidate, and in exchange for 4 department seats, department secretaries, tama? So parang ganon. In exchange for position, these are the elitist type of politics. Okay? And idugtong ko lang no para ma-situate natin yung ating time frame, ang ating ang ating ano. So in written form, hindi kami nag-usap namin dito I just remembered that I had this material. This one is where is it? Where are you? Okay, there. Can you see it? Okay, this one is an article that was written in early 1800s. It is about the territorial expansionist policy of America from 1899. Okay, so they were actually talking here about the territorial expansion in the Philippines and how it relates to American history. And here, I'll go straight to the area where they start talking about that. Right. Wait. By the Treaty of 1873, our western boundary was extended to the Mississippi River, and the entire continent of North and South America were laid claim only by a little over 5%. The account then stood, omitting fractions, Spain 45%, Great Britain 24%, Portugal 20%, Russia 3%, France 1%. The 5% or 800,000 square miles claimed but not occupied by the United States in the year 1800 has expanded to about 24% of the area of all Americans, or 3,600,000 to 990,000 square miles, while largely through permeating moral influence of free government in the United States, republics have displaced the tyranny of Spain and Portugal in Central and South America. And today, with the exception of less than 5%, the Americas have passed under the sway of republican institutions, and monarchism and despotism have been forever extirpated. Okay, so you will see that around this moment, there were a lot of conflicts directly clashing yung mga diniscuss mo, Attorney Ahmed. Naalala mo yung forms of government? So all of those things were what these incidents are contextualized, no? So go back with me for a moment. George Washington died on December 14, 1799. The habiliments of mourning were scarcely laid aside when the statesmen that period addressed themselves most seriously to the problem of territorial expansion. In 1803, 4 years after the death of Washington, Jefferson consummated the Louisiana Purchase, more than doubling then our domain. Monroe negotiated a treaty with Spain in 1819, which he acquired the whole of Florida. Okay, that's 1819. In the administration of President Polk, we received Texas into the Union, and by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we acquired what is now New Mexico, Arizona, and California. The Gadsden Purchase came in 1853 during the administration of President Pierce. Now, ang sinasabi niya dito, now this is where the politics will clash. Let us go back then and take up another thread in our history which has the deepest significance and is necessary part of that policy which leads inevitably to our active interposition in aiding to direct the destinies of the Orient. Okay, look. Direct the destinies of the Orient. Directing the destinies of people is part of elitist thinking. Okay, the league known as the Holy Alliance, okay, which concluded in 1815. Ano ba to? Si French to, no? The French, the Holy Alliance, the Habsburgs, and when they actually invaded Spain also, no? Its declared purpose was not so far-reaching as its real objectives proved to be, for it finally arrogated to itself the right to put an end to the system of representative government in Europe and to destroy the liberty of the press. Isn't this Maria Ressa talking? Okay? It proposed also to crush out struggling republics of South America, which our government had recognized. It is not commonly so understood, but history assures us that the popular sentiment of England led her premier at a critical period to say to our government that England would stand by us if we should resist the attempt of the Allies to overthrow the Spanish American republics. And this is now where you get the Monroe Doctrine. Now, Mr. Monroe was fortunate in having ex-presidents Madison and Jefferson with whom he could advise, and John Quincy Adams as his Secretary of State. Mr. Jefferson said, "Our first and fundamental maxim should be never to entangle ourselves in the broils of Europe. Our second, never to suffer Europe to intermeddle with cis-Atlantic affairs, while Europe is laboring to become the domicile of despotism. Our endeavor should be to make our hemisphere that of freedom. One nation, Great Britain, they mean, no? Most of all, could disturb us in this pursuit. She now offers to lead, aid, and accompany us in it." Nag-feedback ako, pre. "By acceding to her proposition, we detach her from the bands, bring her mighty weight into the scale of free government." Okay? Now, Great Britain is the nation which can do us the most harm of anyone on all of earth. Okay? And with her on our side, we need not fear the world. With her, then, we should most sedulously cherish a cordial friendship, and nothing would tend more to knit our affections than the fighting ones more side by side than in the same cause. Okay? So, the politics here is very similar to what this incident is talking about, no? Around this time, yung 1824 na elections, and it is a long question about how the American theory and how the American politics has changed because of territorial expansions. Okay? Sabi nila, ganyan lang daw yung Amerika, yung kalahati lang dati, ito lang. Okay? And then they expanded, and because of that, they had to change their policy. Why? Okay? They started with a very small population. Where is it? They said they started with a population of from 3 million to 75 million in less than 100 years. Okay, and with that, you can imagine how their governance would have to change also. Okay, where is it? There's teka lang ha. Yeah, there. Okay, since then the increase has been rapid and reached 790,000 in 1882, and as late as 1892 over 600,000. We now number native-born and adopted citizens fully 75 million people. When in fact they started what? Dito. Okay, the Union represented in the census of 1800, Ohio had 500,000. Ilan ba ito lahat? 9,500,000. In all the states, there were but 9,500,000 in 1800. And then in 1892, there were already 75 million. Can you imagine that? So with that, you will have to have a change in a system. So the democracy that we are aware of now is the democracy of the 75 million, not the democracy of the first government, which only had what? 9.5 million in 1800. Okay, yun lang. Context about the time period. Okay. So,
Next.
Yep. I-process muna natin how elitism
Meron ka ba?
develops here. No. You what's going on with your audio? Yeah. You are. Okay.
Nawawala ako di ba? Humihina yung signal
Okay.
Wala ka ng sound, James.
Yeah, kasi nag-mute ako kasi I was about to listen to you.
Why are you muting yourself?
Kasi makikinig ako sa'yo.
Okay, bati-bati muna tayo. Judy Cat, hello. Mami Basang.
Nawawalan ng signal si Attorney Ahmed. Anyway, no? So the point here is that okay, yung electoral college, no, these are just the names, but you can imagine the situation going on. So from the very beginning, their concept of democracy started with us being the learned, being the ones who fought for this freedom, protecting that freedom, and of course, benefiting from it. So si Attorney Ahmed ay nag-freeze frame na pagbigyan natin siyang maka-reboot. Maybe. What happened to him? No, he's frozen. Is he frozen in your sight? Ano nga sa akin o ako yung frozen? Oh, yeah. He's frozen. Okay. I think he needs to restart. So, what do we mean by all of these discussions? Ang problema kasi natin, ang alam natin kalaban natin sa politika ngayon, sa ating society, are the communists. Di ba? Ang lagi nating hinaharbat dito sa media are the NTF-ELCAC. Tama? Now, little did we know that behind all of that, we thought everyone who was pro-democracy was fighting on the same side. Di ba? And our assumption that we are fighting the same cause led us astray to this old issue between those who think that there should be a small group of people who had more right to decide for everyone else. Are you okay with your audio, sir? Try. 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 Unmute mo.
Tuloy lang.
Okay? So this is an old issue. Tama? You're good, JP. Si Osam ang nawawala. Nawawala ka nga daw.
Kaya nga, tuloy ka lang dahil yung internet namin dito ay mahina. Okay?
And that
tuloy
is...
ka lang dyan.
Okay. So you find a solution there. But, okay.
Yes.
So now, are you getting this flow, mga kaibigan? Kasi, what we found out in the last, like yesterday, no, was this move, which is very, very elitist in its very structure and its narrative. And where is her backbone in all of this rhetoric? Because it seems her narrative is being received and amplified by the same groups which are actually behind these events. Okay, like what? Okay. Attorney Ahmed, can you try speaking? I'll just pull up, if I can, would you like me to pull up the freedom rating of the Philippines? Para makita natin kagad yung
Sige,
direct
just continue kasi
may
problema itong...
No, you're okay na eh. You're getting better. I can see it. Yeah, you're better. Yeah, go.
I just discovered na si Attorney Trixie ay nag-Zoom meeting din. Maybe that is the problem.
Okay. Di ba meron kang ibang
I am able to connect properly. Okay? Tuloy ka lang dyan.
Okay. Now, I just want to open this freedom rating. Okay. Do you know about the Freedom House? Sinong may familiarity about the Freedom Index or the Freedom rating ng buong Pilipinas? Meron ba? Pakilagay sa comments kung familiar kayo dito. Freedom House. Okay. Expanding freedom. All right. And let me just share this. Okay. Share screen. Stop ko muna. And then I'll share new one. Share screen. Okay. And where are you? Window. Freedom. There. Now, this group, you may think that this is just a insignificant group. Okay? Lagay natin, no? Nilagay mo na ba? I just read. All right. So, this Freedom House ranks the world's level of freedom base sa kanilang standards. Before we go into their background, let me just show you what is their rating for the Philippines. Okay, I think you would be interested to know, no? Wait, let me see. Where do I go there? Here. Find a country. Okay, countries and territories, and then let's call it Philippines. Okay, Philippines. Based on freedom, we are 55 over 100, and they call us partly free. Just for comparison, just for comparisons for freedom, and then how about internet freedom? For the Philippines, we are 65 ba? Lumabas doon? Saan na yun? Ba't wala? Okay, 65. Partly free. And then on democracy, ito yung pinag-uusapan natin, the other week, the Philippines rates in their ranking, Philippines, where are you? Uy, ba't wala? Wrong spelling ba ako? Okay, Philippines. Bakit ayaw? Phil. Ba't wala na tayo? Hindi na nila tayo ni-rate. Tingnan niya natin, mano-mano. O nga, nawala na tayo Kaya ni Ahmed, ba't nawala tayo dito sa democracy? Meron tayong tinitingnan last time Anyway, so let's just look at this global freedom and the internet freedom. Weird, no? Okay. So the Philippines, this is freedom, This will tie up our issue immediately. Okay. All right. Political rights, 25 over 40. Civil liberties, 30 over 60. With a score of 55 over 100. Let's go now to political rights muna. Okay, sabi, nandito tayo, was the head of government or other chief national elected through fair and free elections. They don't believe that it was a fair and free elections yung kay Rodrigo Duterte. No? So it's just a 3 of 4. Okay lang yan. With the current national legislative representatives elected through free and fair elections, this should have been 2 of 4, but okay, sabi nila. Okay, 3 of 4. And then, are the electoral frameworks fair? 3 of 4. Okay lang yan. Sige. Political pluralism and participation. Okay? Pluralism, Do the people have the right to organize in different political parties or other competitive political groupings of their choice? And is the system free of undue obstacles to the rise and fall of these competing parties and groupings? 3 or 4 lang daw tayo. Why? Sabi nila, the Philippines has a strong record for open competing among multiple parties. Though candidates and political parties typically have weak ideological profiles. Legislative coalitions are exceptionally fluid. So ito yung rainbow coalitions natin. No? Now, is there a realistic opportunity for the opposition to increase its support or gain through elections? Ang sabi nila, 2 of 4 lang. Why? The Philippines has seen regular rotations of power at the national level. However, in recent years, opposition politicians have faced increasing harassment, and some have been arrested on charges denounced by the opposition and rights group as politically motivated. Sino yung sasabi sa kanila nito? An atmosphere of violence and a lack of access to state resources for those not in power hinder the opposition's ability to challenge incumbents. Campaign finance rules, which make elections very costly, impede the ability of grassroots movement to mobilize, participate in, and win elections. In February 2020, former Senator Antonio Trillanes and others were indicted of charges of sedition as part of the alleged plot to oust Duterte. Is this true? Was he charged of sedition?
Yes.
Trillanes?
Pati
Okay.
sina Lenny, kinasuhan yan.
Okay. Doon sa Bicoy, no?
Pero
Sen-
teka muna. Ang susunod nito, I will show a clip that will explain how this happened. Okay? Continue ngayon.
Senator Laila de Lima, one of the most outspoken critics of Duterte or war of drugs, remained in pre-trial detention. Totoo ba pre-trial? Wala ba talaga siyang ano? This is new, ha? This is very new. This is 2021. 2022 pa nga. Yun, look, you can see here. It's 2022. Is she still on pre-trial detention, attorney? De Lima.
Si Laila de Lima is still under detention but lang yan siya.
During trial.
Yeah. During
Not
trial.
pre.
That is why she's
not pre.
Not pre-trial detention. That's a lie.
Yun, no, di ba? And this is 2022, De Lima was arrested in 2017 on charges of accepting money, from drug dealers and is recognized as a prisoner of conscience by international rights groups. So si De Lima is not a prisoner as far as they know because of her
Criminal
involvement
case.
in a criminal activity, but a prisoner of conscience or political prisoner. Political prisoner, no? In July 2021, she announced that she would seek re-election while in detention. In 2021, Duterte government intensified its campaign against the Communist Party of the Philippines. Okay. Oh yes, NTF-ELCAC na to. And its armed wing, the New People's Army, senior government officials openly red-tagged. Okay. Members of the House of Representatives, sila Makabayan Block na iniimbitahan natin.
Sina Sara Elago.
Okay. The accused representatives subsequently received death threats. The government labeled Makabayan Block in November 2020 and the Kabataan Party List as legal friends of the Communist Party of the Philippines. Hindi naman sila kailangan i-brand, di ba? Because they really are. The office of the...
At saka kahit na red tag sila, meaning tatawagin silang NPA, it's not red tagging is not a crime.
Okay.
Maybe it's a libel case for them, but they didn't file libel.
But diba? Go back to the first criteria, sinasabi nila that the Philippines has a strong record of open competition among multiple parties. And this is part of competition among multiple parties.
Exactly.
Tama?
Party list yan sila.
But in the end, they don't like that. So they still call it...
They don't like that.
Okay. They don't like that because that's why we have 2 of 4. Okay? Now, are the people's political choices free from domination by forces that are external to political sphere? This is where you all come in now. 2 of 4. Distribution of power is heavily affected by patronage and kinship networks. Past 30 years, political dynasties, blah, blah, blah. Increased concentration of powers to those families at hand. Okay, social media platforms, especially Facebook, have been weaponized and exploited by Duterte and his supporters. Kayo ba yan? Kaway-kaway naman. Kaway-kaway. On October 2020, Facebook removed hundreds of accounts for violating its policy against coordinated, inauthentic behavior on behalf of a foreign government entity. Who is this?
Tandaan nyo na walang kaso yan, walang proof yan, walang evidence yan. But this is true according to this Freedom House thing.
Okay. One network originated in China, while another, which was linked to the Philippine police and military, criticized activists and the political opposition. Without challenging the findings, Duterte issued vague threats regarding Facebook's operations in the country. Remember, we already read that they claim this to be their handiwork, okay? Si Rappler, right? In that other document.
Ano itong binabasa mo? Bakit hindi gumagalaw yung page na binabasa mo?
No, because I'm stopping here. I'm stopping
okay.
here. Okay, I'm stopping in there. In this Okay, so because of that, we are scored 2 of 4. That's already 50%, Now, on various issues about the LGBTQ, you see, wala silang pakialam sa LGBTQ. 3 or 4 lang daw tayo para medyo safe. The
functioning diba, may mga Congress, meron tayong party list representative na babae na ano ba to? Transgender. Dapat sasabihin nila dyan na mababa yung kalukuhan eh.
The JD understand by a single-member constituency contest. In 2019, several party list groups gained seats not by representing the sectors or the interests as intended, but through substantial support from kinship networks. Whatever that means, okay? Functioning of government, 3 of 4. Now here, are safeguards against official corruption strong and effective? Wow, 1 of 4. Government corruption and impunity remains a serious problem. The courts and other anti-corruption institutions have failed to hold powerful politicians and their associates to account. President Duterte has fired numerous officials due to corruption, but this anti-corruption drive has ultimately led to few convictions. Officials involved in corrupt activities are often reappointed to other offices. Oy, si ano to si kaibigan mo, si Paildon, no? The official anti-corruption agencies, the Office of the Ombudsman and the PACC, have mixed records. The PACC lacks enforcement capabilities. Currently headed by the Duterte's appointed Ombudsman, performance has received criticism for significant decrease in the number of cases filed since 2018. And then our pandemic daw is so bagsak. In September, the Senate launched an investigation into the Duterte administration purchase of 67 billion pesos, $1.3 billion worth of overpriced medical supplies and expired COVID-19 test kits. Have you seen the Blue Ribbon Committee on this?
Yan yung pinacheck natin na
the Blue Ribbon
Committee. Yan.
Okay. No, it is kasinungalingan because there is no fact established. There was an investigation that was never signed, and when an investigation is not signed, then there is no outcome from that investigation, then there is no fact from that investigation. No finding, no proof, no nothing. Those are just allegations, but you put it in here as fact. Okay? Initially flagged for irregularities by the Commission on Audit in August. Do you not see the similarity in the rhetoric? Initially flagged for irregularities by the Commission on Audit. This is the Philippine Star approach, right?
Pare-pareho ng sinasabi.
Okay? Now, does the government operate with openness and transparency? Now you will see, no. It is daw, yung SALN naman yung kanilang issue daw. That is a 2 of 4. Civil liberties and freedom of expression and belief. Okay, now here. Are there free and independent media? Now, the Constitution provides for freedom of expression and the press. The private media are vibrant and outspoken. However, the Philippines remains one of the most dangerous places in the world for journalists. May namatay ba ngayong recently?
Bilisan mo, sabihin mo kung anong pinupunto nito, kung sino.
Hindi. Kasi di ba, compared sa panahon ni Gloria, where there were really a lot of killings, di ba, on journalists, and the president's hostile rhetoric towards members of the media exacerbates an already perilous situation. Perilous. The Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, PCIJ, has found that attacks and threats on the media have continued relentlessly throughout Duterte's administration. The state agencies have made no serious efforts to investigate serious incidents or otherwise address the problem. Di ba may task force kagad na binuo yung may binaril? Yung si journalists experience physical attacks. Have you heard this? Meron ba tayong talagang incident
na gano'n? Sino physically attack?
Na journalist?
Sino?
As in binugbog or sinampal? What? Threats, including death threats and bomb threats. Ayan, you can easily come up with those things. Smear campaigns, claiming they conspire against the government, red tagging, and distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS. That they can really prove if there is something. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, this is an international group, 11 journalists have been killed in the Philippines in connection with their work since 2016. Oh, really? In July 2021, a radio journalist was shot by an unidentified gunman. And in December, a newspaper reporter was shot by an unknown assailant. Di ba ito yung may mga incident na may mga love triangle, mga ganun? The vast majority of violent attacks remain unpunished. In December 2019, however, a trial court found dozens of defendants guilty for brutal massacre of 58 people, including 32 journalists in Maguindanao. So isn't this supposed to be a plus factor rather than a down factor because they were already found guilty? Ito yung Maguindanao massacre panahon ni Pinoy. Di ba? So having them found guilty now, bababa yung ating score. That dalang patuan mo, di ba? Was sentenced to life in prison. What the hell? Di ba? And other obstacles to press freedom, Executive Order number 608, established a national security clearance system to protect classified information, Human Security Act, which allows journalists to be wiretapped based on suspicion of involvement in terrorism. Totoo ba to? Matanong nga si Atty. Parole.
Meron yan.
Journalist talaga?
Hindi journalist. Kahit sino.
Kaya nga, which allows journalist daw eh. Dapat daw ba?
Kasi nungalingan nga to.
Ha? Libel
Isa-isahin natin yung sagutin yan.
Okay, libel is a criminal offense. Of course. Di ba? And libel cases have been used frequently to quiet criticism of public officials. Who has been quieted from criticism because of libel? Even that guy who was sentenced of libel because he attacked Drilon, still continued to attack Drilon after he was convicted. In June 2020, Maria Ressa, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and Ronaldo Santos were found guilty of cyber libel and sentenced to 6 years in prison. In August 2021, Manila Court dismissed libel case against the online news site Rappler Ressa and another co-defendant. Another libel case had been dismissed a couple of months earlier. Oh, very updated sila dun sa mga dismissals, ha? A new case was filed against Rappler 6 organizations in December by Duterte's Secretary of Energy, si Ecusito. Rappler, which had criticized Duterte's war on drugs, had its corporate registration revoked by government regulators in 2018 for violating the prohibition on foreign ownership of Philippine media outlets. Bakit yan magiging kasalanan ng Pilipinas? May batas kami dyan. Rappler reporters were accused by Duterte of being part of fake news outlet and banned from government events and conducting interviews with state officials. In 2020, ABS-CBN, the oldest network, had been accused of bias against him and openly threatened to close it down since 2016. The shutdown was condemned by numerous press. Oh, yun lang ang alam nilang reason for shutting it down because he was biased against Duterte. Advocacy group in July 21 published online a list of 70 lawmakers who voted against it. Okay, and our score was 104. And then, saan pa tayo mababa? 204 is their freedom of assembly. Wala daw. Dahil may COVID. Siyempre, di ba? Is there freedom of non-governmental organization because engage in human rights governance network. Sino itong mga to? Civil society. Sino to si Rex Fernandez? Human rights lawyer was shot and killed by a gunman in Cebu. Sige, systemic attack daw. Okay, fine. Is there freedom of trade unions and semi-professional trade unions? Stigmatization and violence and membership. Rule of law. Okay, is there rule of law? Is there an independent judiciary? No. Why? Because we impeached Sereno. Yan o, 104. Judicial independence has deteriorated during the administration of Duterte because they impeached Sereno. Fine. Does due process prevail in civil or criminal matters? 0 of 4. 0 for my friends. Take note, 0 for. This is the lowest. The justice system fails to guarantee due process right. Arbitrary detention, disappearance, kidnapping, and abuse of suspects are common. The OCHR cataloged numerous due process violations linked to Duterte's war on drugs, including the use of watch lists compiled by local officials that they target. Okay. Anti-Terrorism Act took effect on July 2020. 0 na talaga tayo. Police and military have been implicated in corruption, extortion, and involvement in the illegal drug trade. Siyempre, naglilinis si Digong, di ba kayo naglabasan? At nung naglabasan, sasabihin nyo, wala kaming... Ano ko, na-high blood ako. Rights advocates sharply criticize laws of broad definition of terrorism. Okay? 104 is their protection of legitimate use of physical force and freedom of... Now it gets worse and worse. Do laws practices guarantee equal treatment of various segments of the population. 104. Personal autonomy and individual
Saan
rights.
yung binabasa
Okay.
mo? Saan yan?
Ito.
Yan o, independent judiciary pa rin na nakikita namin.
Kaya nga, this is part of independent judiciary, no?
Oo nga, pero yung part na binabasa mo, can we see it?
Andito na ako sa yan, F4. Are you seeing F4?
F4. Sino
Yeah,
ba?
it's F4
Nakikita
na,
nyo
di
ba
ba?
na gumalaw yung binabasa ni Attorney ni Sir JB?
F4. Okay na
Kasi
siya ni Ahmed. Okay na yung audio nyo. Okay na yung audio mo. Okay?
Oh.
Now, who is this Freedom House? Okay? We cannot take them lightly. You know why? You know why we cannot take these people lightly? Even if you will say, pabayaan mo yun sila kung ano sinasabi nila sa Pilipinas. No. No. You cannot just say that. Why? Because this Freedom House is a very influential institution when it comes to making decisions about loans to our country, investments to any country. So when people make decisions, bankers make decisions, the elitists make decisions about whether or not papasok sila sa Pilipinas o hindi, they consult these numbers from the Freedom House. Okay? And that is very dangerous. And who are they exactly? What are they responsible for? Let's see. Where am I? Where is that? Okay, there. Bakit hindi ako lumalabas dito sa harapan? This one ba? Okay. Who are they? Let's go to who they are. Who we are. Kaya galit sila sa issue authoritarian reach. Okay, yan yung mga issues nila. Issue nila, media freedom, religious freedom, freedom of expression. Pero diretso muna tayo sa kanya ng who we are, about us, history. Alright, history. It's the oldest American organization devoted to the support of defense of democracy around the world. It was established in 1941. By whom? By the wife of the president, Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. And what was their first major accomplishment? Okay, this is quite long, but I will tell you their first advocacy was to establish the human rights body inside the United Nations. They are that influential. Okay, you cannot take these people for granted. And yung mga Magnitsky rule, which is affecting us, they played a central role in the adoption of the Magnitsky rule. So, American investments, American businesses with the Philippines, which you cannot say, pabayaan mo yan, may China. China only accounts for 4% of our exports. Majority of our exports, about 50% goes to the United States. And because of this Magnitsky rule, business with the United States is at peril. And why would we want to save that? Because our economy, our survival for the next 5 years will depend on our business with this United States and Europe, not with China. We're buying from China, but they're not buying from us. They're only buying 4% of our exports. Okay, we're affected by that. And what else? What is their highlights? Okay, 40s. Including journalists. They always have journalists with them. Right? They attacked the Nazis. They went to the UN and urged the formation of the Commission on Human Rights, International Bill of Human Rights. So your human rights that is in our constitution is also mandated by the United Nations, and that's why we have it there. And they are the ones behind it. Your rights, sabi niyo, they all depend on the freedom of the press, except our qualified student. Okay, 1950s and now, what are their advocacies now? Ukrainian elections, Freedom House coordinated North Korea, Uzbekistan. Okay, these people are not nobody. Okay, calls on President Obama to urge Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak to step down. Sipin mo yan. They asked the U.S. President for him to tell the President of another country to step down. So these people are being fed by a girl named Maria Ressa because they are also funding yung mga USAID, which funded the Intertech, mga ganon. All of these things are related now. So you see what we have in front of us. We are not fighting communism anymore. We are fighting our misunderstood democracy. Dahil para sa kanila, tayong lahat ay mga kampon ng isang populist na kalaban nila. You see? This is worse than your communist adversary.
Insurgency. Kasi ginagago nila tayo.
They will make, actually, these people will make the communist threat a joke. Because they can actually, if they are able to silence us and people will start believing now into that media that Maria Ressa wants to, wala na. We will be overrun by this kind of rhetoric pa ulit-ulit. Now we know why the world has a very bad impression about the Philippines. Okay. Sige, ikaw muna. Maganda na yung audio at video mo eh. Game, sir.
Ito, pakinggan nyo.
Yan.
Ito ang mangyayari sa atin pagka hindi natin to pinigilan tong ginagawa ni Maria Ressa.
John, when our nation was founded, there was media, it was essentially newspapers. How has the evolution of media affected the evolution of political discourse?
At the beginning of our country, the editors of the rival newspapers, there was no middle-of-the-road newspaper. You were either for one side or the other. You were either a Federalist or you were with the Jeffersonian Democrats, Democratic Republicans, as they call themselves. And the editors were at each other's throats so violently, they would sometimes get in fights in the street and knock each other down. So it was, and you had lawmakers who were supposed to be men of virtue, it was all men in those days, would be leaking documents. Alexander Hamilton, the Treasury Secretary, and Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, would leak documents to their favorite papers in order to attack the other. And eventually George Washington had to come in and say, knock it off, fellas, because this isn't good for the country. So the bitterness carried out in the press was with us from the founding. What changed over time is that it became in the interest of the newspapers, particularly, to appeal to a larger audience. That means you didn't want just the left or the right, you wanted both. And so that created a tradition, along with a few other things, where there was an attempt to give just the facts, a kind of middle-of-the-road perspective. We are changing from that now, where the economics of covering the news and the digital change, where you now can have anybody speaking and gaining access to the public, has created a situation where you have a more partisan press now, and we're in the middle of trying to figure out where that's going next.
So this is interesting because a lot of people, when they talk about, oh, well, now it's getting polarized and partisan, the good old days when you got the truth, the wisdom from Walter Cronkite or whoever. But what you're really talking about is maybe what's going on now is a little bit of a reversion back to where we started.
That's right. In terms of the partisanship of the press, it is a reversion towards the early days of America. And in terms of the partisanship of the individual members of Congress or of the White House, what is a little bit different is that the call to virtue, which would snap people out of their partisanship, is still up for grabs. Whether the founders, when they fought like cats and dogs during the early years of the administrations, I mean, Thomas Jefferson was best friends with John Adams and essentially then hired a newspaper writer to undermine Adams when he was president. I mean, this was a very dirty pool. The argument they were making, though, was our country is new, and what is at stake is the very survival of the American experiment. And so they were fighting for real stakes. They weren't just trying to primarily keep power. They were really trying to make this flower bloom that they had just planted. So now the question is, what role does virtue play in the American experience to pull people away from their partisanship, to make them work together for common interests? And what is that shared area of common interest? What pulls them away from what the founders knew, people would behave like dogs sometimes, but they thought they could pull away if they thought about the common interest. Well, is that pull still there?
So there's a lot of talk these days about polarization of the media or polarization of politics in general. How much of it do you think is due to things like social media, or do you think it was inevitable?
Well, we've always had polarization in American politics, but there was a dose of something else, which was a call to a higher American ideal. And also voters would vote on people based on their virtue, on their larger than life statesmanship, which was not partisan. So you had to keep a balance. If you were being highly partisan, you kind of did it in quiet. What's changed now with social media and also with the flood of money in politics is that it has encouraged people to be more and more partisan. The louder and hotter I talk on a specific issue, the more money I'm going to be able to raise, the more interest groups are going to like me, and the more clicks I'm going to get because I'm the one making.
Wow, worldwide.
Problem is that means the arguments are always containing flamboyant noise, and the people who want a calm, steady, measured conversation, well, they're not getting read on social media. They're not in charge of the interest groups that pay millions and millions of dollars. So this
yung sinasabi diyan na yung mga tao daw na gustong pag-usapan itong issues ng nangyayari ay hindi nababasa at binabasa at nakikita, naririnig sa social media. Bakit? Kasi anong nangyayari sa kanila, JP? They are throttled. They are throttled on social media. Okay, tuloy.
System encourages people to stay apart. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Secretary of Defense James Mattis says it may be the greatest threat to American democracy, that polarization.
And do you see a way of this getting resolved, or does it get worse? Does it get better?
There have been periods of American history where we have been the split. Obviously, the Civil War was a period of great rending in the American fabric. What changed it was an actual conflict. And so that, God forbid, would be one way to do it. Another would be if there was a threat to America from outside its borders and people would feel an acute sense of national pride and patriotism. But other than that, there doesn't appear to be at the moment a quick fix for what is a complicated problem for why the two parties have gotten into a kind of inescapable fight that they can't seem to get themselves out of.
It's like we need a shock to remind ourselves how much commonality there is. So all of that polarizing quibbling kind of goes away, or at least gets covered up a little bit.
Big changes in American history usually happen from a shock, and it's what breaks people out of their behavior, and also which tells a lot of the people in the rest of the country who don't participate in presidential elections and don't participate in congressional elections. It reminds them that something real is at stake. And there is a vast group of Americans who really want solutions in the middle, who don't care about the bickering and the ideology, but a lot of them don't participate in politics. And so the kind of shock that would make people behave who are partisans is also the kind of shock that might draw in people who were just apathetic and not participating in the political.
And this is a shock, yung what we created, di ba? What happened was we created a shock, di ba? Especially kung yung ABS-CBN, and you can see na yung mga tao they really went out and found a new source of information, di ba? We were really a threat. This movement in social media in the Philippines, we were a threat to the pluralist narrative or the pluralist strategy. And losing that election that just passed, no, is a reminder for them that they cannot take us for granted. That's why as early as now, we are being discouraged, because like me, I was really discouraged at first when I didn't know that there was something external causing this issue ng ating mga mababang reach, di ba? Dito sa amin, misunderstood, I wanna report, dito sa atin, misunderstood democracy is worse than communist insurgency. Yup. Di ba? Sino tong isa? Sino to? Si Anne. Frustrating. Knowing about this is news to me. And I've lived here for decades. You're in the US? Or in the Philippines? Where are you? But wherever you are, di ba? Wherever you are, ang problema natin is, this is a silent war. I think it's church. This is a silent war. A war that has been raging inside democracy for the longest time. Di ba? War okay, it was not in the item I read, but it was explained in the video that Attorney Ahmed saw. And we did not even exchange notes, ha? And I read the other material for Philippine history studies. And I just remembered, I have all of these dates in my in that article which I read about how the US expanded, and it must have something to do with population, area, and free flow of or the need, diba? The need to distribute that kind of power over the 80 million. So for a time, diba? Meron talaga tong issue yung dalawang partido na yan, the ones who agree to the general principle na we all have equal voice and government is supposed to protect that fairness and equality in society, but there are people who will believe that some are smarter than others. Hoy, kaya ano yun Ferdinand Marcos yun Arte Imelda pala, no? Some are smarter than others.
Kaya nga, ang move nito ngayon is that we have seen in this discussion tonight, at saka nung sa panood natin na mga clips, ay gusto ni Maria Ressa na umalis tayo dito sa uri ng demokrasya na lahat tayo ay nakakapagsalita. Kasi nandoon na tayo sa na sinasabi ni John Quincy ni Andrew Jackson that everybody should be empowered. They should be able to have a say in the government. Nandiyan na tayo ngayon, especially with the internet and social media. Everyone now can say something about the president, about the congressman, senator, and everyone. Okay? Ang gusto ni Maria Ressa ay ipatigil yan. Gusto niya bumalik doon sa panahon ni John Quincy Adams na merong elite na grupo na sila ang magkocontrol, mag-gateway ng impormasyon para magtuloy-tuloy ang demokrasya na tinatawag ni Maria Ressa. Ang tanong ngayon dyan, ano pang demokrasya ang tinutukoy ni Maria Ressa at ano yung ang demokrasya na at sinasabi niyang flawed? Okay? Ang sinasabi niyang flawed na democracy ay itong democracy natin ngayon na sinulong ni Andrew Jackson. Okay? Ang gusto niyang itaguyod o ibalik dahil yun daw ang tamang demokrasya ay yung pluralistic, elitistic democracy that was even an older form of democracy in the timeline of democracy in America. Okay? So gusto niya na we go a little bit more primitive than we are right now because being primitive is better for them. The elite.
Okay. Ang gusto ko lang na i-point out dun sa examples na ating tiningnan, yung criteria of choice on who gets the vote and who gets political power in the old system hinged on property.
At saka education, aristocrat sila.
Yes. So, ang kanilang idea is the government is there to serve these economics of moneyed people. And because of that, that is carried on. So ngayon, hindi naman nila sinasabi na sila lang ang pwedeng pumasok sa gobyerno because of course they don't like the typing job, they don't like the but they like the secretary's job. Okay? They like the secretaries and they like the pump and the But ito yung kanilang ngayon wag nyo lang pakialaman yung mga moneyed people. Because otherwise, when you take kutsa about our existence, that we are rich and you are not, that we are able to get all the contracts we want from government, franchises that we like, natural resources that we want to exploit and you do not even know about, don't think about those things because those are for us to know. Hindi kayo,
Because
hindi nyo kami
we
reach.
are the we are
We are
the
the-
gatekeepers.
We are the gatekeepers of knowledge and information in this
Mm.
goddamn
Diba,
God-made world.
yan na yan ang rhetoric ni Maria Ressa. Okay?
Hindi yan pangarap,
Ngayon,
Adrian, ha? Hindi pangarap yan. It's not a dream. Not a dream. You know why?
It's already
Do you-
there.
It's there. You do not know how much of our natural resources are being exploited by these oligarchs. Do you know? Do you know how much they're paying for every cubic meter of water that you are paying for from Manila Water? Where do they get that? Do they pay for it? Do you even know if they pay for it or not?
Libre yan, libre. Hindi, ang sinasabi ni Adrian yung debate daw.
Yes,
yung sinagot
yes.
niya yung isa na television debate. But
Oo, kasi
okay,
they don't like us to know.
propaganda. Propaganda itong ginagawa ni Maria
Yeah,
Ressa.
correct. Tama
Saying
kayo.
all of these things to the foreign media that if we scrutinize it with an analytical mind, will hold no water at all. Because she's just completely lying to the international media.
Hmm.
So where are we there? Where are we there? If we care about our democracy where everyone can vote, where everyone, not only those who have money and property, can say something
Correct.
about the politics of this country, then we have to protect our democracy right now. All right? We have to stand up and tell the world that Maria Ressa is a liar, that he is starting a seditious movement to remove what we have here as a democracy and to replace the officials of this government. And because, according to her, this government does not serve democracy. This is not a democratic government. Binasa natin sa Freedom House report na zero halos ang mga score natin sa mga points ng democracy. At totoo ba yung facts doon? Hindi. Pero bakit ganun yung grade nila? Because naniniwala sila sa propaganda ng mga taong kagaya ni Maria Ressa. Ano ang ginagawa ni Maria Ressa sa makatweet? Okay? Isang salita na lang. Ano ginagawa niya? She is trying to change the regime of this government, of this country. She is trying to remove the democracy that we have and exchange and substitute something else in its place. Isn't that sedition? Isn't that rebellion? Tingnan natin.
Okay.
Pero anong challenge sa atin? That we have
challenge
to
is to
stand
bring
up.
this out. Okay, in fact,
We
if
stand
we
up
have
and multiply and
yes,
spread all of these things to as many people as we can.
okay,
Yan
she
yun.
doesn't want, ang ganda nitong point. Wait lang muna, kaya itong kay Adrian, ang ganda nito. Pero si Tatay Strauss, sabi ni Tatay Strauss, American delusion. At Tatay Strauss, I don't think this is just a delusion on their end, no? Because at the back of these people's mind, kunwari, yung mga policymakers dyan sa Freedom House, they don't really go down and get their hands dirty in all of these questions of democracy all over the world. But in the middle, there are these middlemen like Maria Ressa who are peddling them this information that feeds their machineries. Okay, they cannot also allow these people to be left to hang dry. So they protect these people na nag-work for them, and they must be made aware that we know na yung kanilang kinikaring like kanina, ako I tried this one. I wrote The Guardian in UK and The Observer, the editors. So I wrote them. I sent them a copy of that yung failed defense kasi they just published something about Maria Ressa's conviction dito sa Pilipinas. Kasi ganyan yung style nila. They don't stop at the day na nangyari yung event. Patingaw yan eh, patingaw. This is a network of media people. Now, Maria Ressa is so important to them in this campaign. This is a worldwide campaign. This is not just about America or what, no? Now, you will notice, kunwari lang ang nakulong ay si Ivan Mayrina, they wouldn't care as much. Yeah. Kunwari lang hindi ako nagsasabi na dapat makulong si Ivan Mayrina. I wanna make that clear. Pero kung si Ivan Mayrina yan, they wouldn't care as much. Pero mapapansin mo that a person is so important to the cause because they will publish your issue not at the same time and not even on the day. They will publish now, days after. Iikot ng iikot yan sa buong mundo. And it will not stop until everyone thinks that this girl is right and that country is evil. And you must help us bring this out because, people like mga brad namin na nakaka-chat, well, they don't even get notifications for these things. Pero before, they used to. So our content rarely goes out of the Philippines. Tingnan nyo, walang nakakatanggap nito outside of the country. So if you are not from the Philippines, please share this to your friends outside and let them share it there. Kasi walang algo dun that stops Ahmed and me. Nakaano yan? Compartmentalized din yan sila per country. Please do that. Make sure that your friends there na nasa labas, sila ang magkalat. Tingnan natin if it will still stop moving around. Kasi hindi talaga siya lumalabas. I just talked to a brad ko na nasa California who used to listen to us in Tambayan. Ahmed, he no longer sees us anymore. No more. Yan.
Meron ka bang latest na na notice from Facebook na meron kang violation? Yung latest, yung recent violation.
No more.
Luminous, in fact, wala rin.
In fact,
nakakapag-monetize tayo.
In fact, when I called their attention on the number of my di ba yung nilabas ko dun sa ko na bakit to pantay na pantay yung aking bagong likers at saka unlikers sumasabay. Hindi ako lumalayo dito sa 44,170 to 180 na range. Tingnan mo, days after, ngayon, umakyat na ako ng 200. Alam mo yun, nakikinig sila sa atin Some of those 100 people there who are not commenting here are from Facebook and from Rappler. I know. They're listening to us.
We know you are
diba?
Here. And it hurts, diba? It hurts to listen to us.
Sleep na tayo, Rocky.
Sleep na tayo.
Yes, we can sleep on that.
Patuloy natin tong expose ng kasinungalingan nitong media na kumakampi kay Maria Ressa.
Okay, she's not alone. She's not alone. She is being backed by a network outside and a network inside this country. Okay? So, pwede bang yun yung isipin nyo, how do you bring out this information? We can come up, if you have ideas, you have networks there, we can come up with content na especially dedicated for them.
Alright?
Di ba, Rocky, Wambago? May questions tayo. Kasi baka masabi ni Adrian. Nasaan yung sabi ni Adrian? Ha?
Si Adrian, isali na natin yan.
Oo nga, gusto ko to isali. Sabi ni Adrian, from what I heard, she no longer accepts invitations where the audience can ask her questions. Kayo, may questions kayo. Baka sabihin naman nila, hindi kami nagpapatanong ng questions. Sino may tanong dyan? 5 minutes. Di ba? Hello from USA. Teresa Yap. Paki-share.
Hello, Teresa.
Paki-share nyo yung at least yung mga page namin ikalat nyo dyan. Subukan nyo lang.
Kasi ganito yan ang may kasabihan kasi na kung ang presidente ay pinatulan niya lahat ng mga nagsasabi ng kalokohan kasi nungalingan tungkol sa bansa at saka sa kanya, wala na siyang ibang magagawang trabaho. Okay? Puro na lang sagot-sagot sa mga intrigero ang gagawin niya. Kaya hindi yan ginagawa ng ating Pangulo. Ang dapat gumawa niyan ay ang taong bayan dahil tayo yung sinisiraan. Okay? Tayo ang sinisiraan ni Ressa sa ibang bansa. Tayo ang hindi pinapautang ng mga lending institutions abroad kasi ang binabasa ng mga lending institutions before they lend money ay yung mga report na kagaya ng ginawa ng Freedom House. Di ba?
Oh. Yeah, and the Freedom House, do not be angry at these people, no? Because they will always exist. I'm reading here a news item from Trixie. Okay, it's published by Manila Times. So meron doon bago tayong Sandigan Bayan Associate Justice Alex Quiroz. Chairman, the president named Sandigan Bayan Associate Justice Alex Quiroz as chairman of the Governance Commission for Government-Owned and Controlled Corporations, and former lawmaker Franz Joseph George Alvarez. Do you remember this guy? Franz Joseph George Alvarez. Oh, who remembers him? Who remembers him? Oh, he's the one na nag-hearing ng ABS-CBN franchise as acting president and chief executive officer of the PNOC. Oo, mapera dyan, boy. Pero mayaman naman si Alvarez eh. Okay, De Vera was previously appointed CHED Commissioner. Oh, si Popoy? Popoy is former President Rodrigo Duterte. Oh, tinanggal ba si De Vera? Ba't parang naputol? Popoy De Vera is chairman of Commission on Higher Education. Wow, reappointed. Congratulations, Popoy De Vera. Boss ni Spaki, no?
Ang isa pang balita ngayon ay yung namaril sa Ateneo.
Oh yeah, yung may mayor doon na namatay. Totoo ba yan? Mayor ng Basilan?
Kilala mo kamaril? Sino yung
No, I don't know kung sino yung namaril.
Kilala mo?
Alam ko yung
nabasa mo?
Binarel. Yung binarel. Yung binarel.
Ang namaril daw, ang nahuli daw, according to the PNP, ay ang pangalan ay Chow Chow Yumul, doktor.
What the hell? Ha? Hindi nga. Ito ba
ang pinatay Basilan?
Kaya nga yung
Basilan.
yung kinagalit niya na mayor? Yung babae?
Well, go and figure it out. Kasi ang nahuli daw ng mga pulis ay ang pangalan Chow Chow Yumul.
Oh my
doktor.
God. You see, Maria Reza, when people are being throttled, their voice is not heard. They end up killing people. Diba? Because that guy, that doctor, was so... Okay, I have
frustrated siya.
Yeah, he was so
siya
frustrated
sa mga nangyayari doon sa Basilan.
Yeah, he had an issue and nobody wants to listen to him. None of the news agencies would believe him. And then nung binugbog siya, I didn't believe him too. Because he ended up accusing Duterte now being the head of the drug war, being the most, kumbaga, yung tao na Duterte yung pinaka-drug lord dito sa buong Pilipinas. Kaya sabi ko, parang labo mo, boy. Di ba? So,
pero after the election, nung natalo si Lenny, balik na naman siya uli sa, sa pagsuporta sa BBM, kay Duterte.
Pero dilawan talaga siya, di ba?
I don't know. Para sa akin, na-frustrate na talaga siya. He took matters into his own hands.
He was looking for a way for his voice to get heard, no? Hindi siya napakinggan sa loob ng mga DDS, hindi rin siya napakinggan sa loob ng mga dilawan, at lalo nang hindi siya pinapakinggan at hindi pinapaniwalaan ng mainstream media. So what does he do? He shoots the mayor. Wow, my God. Oh my God. Kung siya talaga yan, ha? Alam niyo yung pinost ko bago lang na nakaganon si Duterte tapos may taong si Chow Chua yun. Okay? But I don't think
kilala
that
namin yan siya. Kami dalawa ni JP.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the killing is his fault. But we brought him there. This society that media interferes so much in, we brought him there where he had to do it. But what he did is a crime. It's wrong.
Para tong kaso ng Les Miserables, no? Yung media na masyadong powerful, na masyadong mabusisi. At yung issue lang nila, yung issue nila.
Salamat kay Bench.
So, mga friends, dumami ulit yung ating mga listeners doon sa ibang bansa. Ngayon lang ata sila nagsisipasukan, yung mga mag-umaga na ba sa ibang bansa? Ano ba tayo? I'm sad for the doctor. Yeah, Luna. Very, very sad. Dr. Yumul. In fact, ako lilinawin ko lang, ang dulo ng aming bakbakan ay para kaming sino ba yung magkaaway na yung mga bading Gershi sa social media to namin yung teenager mo. Sino? Si Sash at saka si Si Sash at saka sino yung nagawa? Basta ako, di ba? Ako, sinabi ko kay Yumol, di ba? Na wala naman ako issue sa'yo. Issue ko lang, di ba? Huwag kang mangdamay ng mga taong wala kang ebidensya. Pero kung gusto mo, mag-usap tayo ng yung mga issue na pwede nating paglaban together, di ba? Pero wala naman siyang ginawa. And then he also, reached out to me na huwag na natin itong palakihin. No, he's a nice person, actually. Yeah. So I stopped there and then he stopped also. I know he never attacked me back. Yeah. Never. Yung mga niya lang, trolls niya lang. Trolls who were building him up. Sipin mo yung trolls na hindi natutulog ng 3 araw. Matutulog na ako, nagko-comment pa yung paggising ko nagko-comment pa rin. Pangatlong araw nagko-comment pa rin every hour. Sabi ko hindi na to tao, no? So he was being built up by the Dilawans to go inside the DDS groups. Yun yung aking suspicion at the time, which I was never able to prove except for that troll. And he had nothing to do with that. Because siya mismo nagsasabi, hindi ko kilala yan. Nag-message sa akin. Okay, so wala kami. He was messaging me, not posting against me.
He is a victim of what the media is
what
doing.
We are describing. Yeah.
Yung kanina sinasabi doon sa clip na we are being pulled away from what is a debate, na tayo ay na-polarize na ng gusto, that the people that listen to us and like our posts are the people that already agree with us. Wala na tayong naaabot ng mga tao na pwede pa nating baguhin ng pag-iisip dahil hindi na tayo ina-allow na reach out pa sa kanila because of what Facebook is doing to us. This algorithm thing that segregates everyone and puts them into classes and keeps them noisy within their own class but without reaching any other people or class.
Okay.
Yan yung resulta niyan.
Habang tutugtog natin yung banner, yung ating last song, lalagay ko rin yung sa ating crawler yung ating mahalagang balita galing sa ating mahal na rin Reza. No, yan, Yan, nandiyan siya para magmuni-muni kayo habang tinutugtog natin ang ating
salamat po.
Asan na yung ating music attorney? Ba't ang dami na nito? Dumami na itong mga nandito.
Sa brand.
Ayun.
Music. Sa brand.